Okay, uh, we go a little back. John Winthrop, who founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony, he came there on a ship called Arabella, which shipped 10 years after Mayflower, and it was his actions and ideas that gave this colony and actually neighboring colonies much of its essential character. He was married at 17 by family arrangement. His wife produced 6 children, and then she died in 1615.
As one does.
Right, of childbirth probably. He remarried, but then the wife died a year later. My God, if I were married to him, I'd die too.
As one does.
Now we have to understand something about these Puritans, and that says much about the art as well. Despite the fact that they carried on their ship 10,000 gallons of alcohol, of which they probably most of it had consumed during their voyage, they were not just colonizers. Say, for instance, the Spaniards. Once the Spaniards got rid of the Native Americans and they built there in Mexico City, and they set off to recreate the old country in the new lands. Their motto was, we want nothing new. Everything new is evil, everything old is wonderful. That's what we're going to recreate. And the Spaniards, of course, were Catholics, so they had to have their churches beautifully decorated, and those could afford it, their homes as well. So they brought artists with them. They brought artists, they brought craftsmen, they brought materials, they brought everything from the old world to recreate the old country in the new world. So they came with their art. It was essential to them, because that's what they had before, that's what they're going to have now. And Spanish colonial architecture and art is very interesting and, of course, fascinating. We're not going to talk much about it, probably won't have the time. But from the very beginning, art was inseparable from society, as it was back home. These, of course, were Protestants with their second commandment. And they had a vision. Particularly John Winthrop had a vision. He was an extremely arrogant man, hiding behind the pure Protestantism. He really felt that he was turning a page of history. His was the new tribe of Israelites who were leaving the evil old world and who were going towards the promised land, and the Massachusetts Bay Colony will be that beacon that will shine back at Europe and shame it and show it the errors of its way. They were the pure of heart. They were the straight of purpose. They were the new tribe, and they were on the right. They were right, everybody else was wrong. Interestingly, had it been up to Thomas Jefferson, who was no Puritan, but he considered putting the Exodus with a beam of light on the dollar bill, but didn't happen. We ended up with a pyramid and an eye. So everyone who disagreed was wrong. For him, just as for the Spaniards, nothing new was acceptable. For him, nothing old was acceptable. This idea of newness, this idea of progress, is very much imbued in the American mentality as a result. And it really goes, and it doesn't matter what background we are. In the country in general, the idea of new, the new is better than old, is very powerful, and we live with it. They were also very hard workers. the Puritan ethic, remember our Puritan ethic, and they did not feel there was absolutely any conflict with Christ's teaching. On the contrary, they felt give to God what's God and to Caesar what's Caesar's, except they felt themselves as the Caesars, and they felt that the harder they work in the name of God, and the more prosperous they become, the more pleased God will be. And they very much, John Winthrop felt very much that he spoke directly to God. He needed no interceptors. He was his, sort of like Calvin, he was his voice and ears at the same time. And Salem's witch hunt stems directly from this kind of attitude. And art was, as I said, regarded as something Catholic. And something Catholic equals spiritual depravity, equals immorality. Any appeal to the senses, as art does, is to be avoided because it is by nature subversive and anti-Puritan. One must, just as the churches were sterile, one must remain sterile at heart in order to imbue God's grace. So that was the attitude of the early colonies. Let's see. Arabella, the flagship of the fleet, transported themselves and the charter of the Massachusetts Bay Company to Salem, thereby giving legal birth to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. During this adventure, the ship is said to have carried 3 times as much alcohol as water. So clearly, John Winthrop felt exceptions were necessary, especially where his own taste was concerned. The charter recorded around 10,000 gallons of wine on board for the personal supply of the crew and passengers. And they had consumed almost all of it in 6 weeks' time. He is reputed to have given the famous A Model of Christian Charity sermon aboard the ship. He was not charitable, as Sasha and I were talking about here, towards the native populations. In fact, most uncharitable. He regarded them as vermin and felt they needed to be treated as such. And particularly their incomprehension of his message and their unwillingness to convert to his religion made them all the more vermin. And when they began to die of smallpox in droves, he was a happy man.
Wow.
They were horrible people. All these places, Ipswich,
Yeah.
they all had lovely names.
Oh, yeah.
And of course they were all renamed because everything was new now. It was New England, it was New Massachusetts.
It was Ipswich. Ipswich sounds like a sneeze.
New London, everything is new. Everything has to be new. Everything has to be rethought and redone. Except, of course, the houses, the furniture that still followed very much the English traditions because, well, back to the increase in wealth. The moment wealth is increased and art is thought about, one thinks of depicting oneself. So all early American art is portraits. All of it. Really, the entire 17th century and into the 18th century, it's all portraits. Because you see, art actually has the power to preserve the past. And while art may also celebrate the present, and perhaps look into the future, but its very powerful aspects is that it preserves the past. And now we may think that, well, they're Puritans, and what do they care, dust to dust, and everything is dust, but they care. When they begin to produce the next generations, they were concerned, they were concerned that being away from England and being away from the English, from the living English, that ignorance will follow. And they were careful about that. They did not want their children to be ignorant. And those who had acquired wealth immediately started hiring hiring tutors and getting tutors from England for their children. Harvard was founded, 16 something, 36. A number of printing presses appeared, and they were very anxious, in fact, to uphold the learning. Of course, the Bible was the number one reading material, but other books as well. They were bringing now books from England, and they were anxious that they themselves keep it up, and of course the following generations. And there came art. They also wanted for the following generations to know where these families come from, and to have respect for that, and to have stability, to have roots, because people may come and go, but the families, they felt like a good vine. It grows stronger and stronger with each generation. And the better they educated, and the greater merchants they become, the better it becomes the ultimate great. So that was art came in handy. Well, professional artists, English artists trained in the academy, had absolutely no interest to come. So therefore they had to employ the self-taught limners, so to speak. A limner, L-I-M-N, comes from illumination, medieval illumination, where you illume a book with pictures. And to limn, L-I-M-N, meant to take a likeness. It did not mean to depict perfectly or to give life. No, it was to give a likeness. And a limner could also be a carpenter, and could be a jack of all trades, and he would also come to the house and do chores, and at the same time paint a picture. And these the early colonial pictures, they're very charming. Together with the books, the colonists began to import illustrated books, and mezzotints, the prints of European art, because they still very much, John Winthrop may have thought of himself as the beacon of light, but the population in general still very much looked back to Europe for inspiration. So these limners had their prints kind of to look at, and of course they were unskilled in the academic tradition, but they knew about form, not so much color, form. And for them, form was a line. You draw a silhouette first. You draw a contour, not silhouette, so a contour, and then you just use color to fill in the between these contours. But the form itself is done with a line. One of these limners once said, "What use do I have for light and shadow? Line will always be there. Light and shadow come and go." And that was the attitude. So as a result, these early portraits, of course naive, of course provincial, but they have this aspect of immediacy, of truth to them. And there's no question that this child, the face, looked like the portrait that you see. So that was the most important thing, to convey the likeness. Never mind the elegance. Never mind we are into 17th century. Never mind the Baroque exuberance or light and shade and the tenebrism. Never mind all that. What these people need, they're straightforward people. They don't really understand exuberance. They are very suspicious of exuberance because Baroque, in their mind, is associated with Catholic. Catholic in their mind is associated with subversive, with immorality. They want their straightforward, their Puritan image. It just has to look like them. And there it is. And thus we have one, Robert Gibbs is portrayed here. He's a boy, and as we know, in the old countries, boys, when they were young until a certain age, were dressed in what to us appears like a girl. But he does hold gloves in his hands, and those presumably indicated his gender as a man. And here it says to limn is to depict a likeness. We do not know who the limner was, and unfortunately most of these early portraits do not have signatures, nor do they think of themselves as artists. It was just another skill. It was they were craftsmen who could do a number of things. They, of course, they would do the frames, and they will gild. They would, well, probably the frame was not gilded at this point. And as such, we call them sort of the Gibbs limner, or by the family names, by the families which they depicted. And thus we have there's a proud poise to the boy. So it's possible that, in fact likely, that he showed the boy a mezzotint. He showed him to stand like this, please have good poise as if you have a bunch of books on your head. Stand like this young prince is standing in the mezzotint. And the boys were very obedient, and that's exactly what the boy does. He, of course, is dressed in his Sunday best. The Limner knew that to have your arm at your hip is a sign of nobility, is a sign of gentility. The only problem is that he didn't quite know how to depict it correctly, but who cares? So here is the boy with his arm at his hip, except the Limner, as I said, failed to represent the bent arm well. But the idea is there, and that's all they need. So they have all these Baroque mezzotints, and Baroque must have a curtain above for dramatic effect. By all means, have a bit of a dramatic effect. Thus, and then he gives him a lovely checkered floor to convey marble, to convey some idea of a Renaissance palace. Here is another very, very charming one, and this is done by a freak limner. It was a wealthy family. Is that how you pronounce it? Freake.
I guess.
Freaky? Should I say freaky instead? just
Freaky.
Freaky. Just so it doesn't sound like a freak.
Freaky doesn't sound better than freak.
No? Okay.
Because you're freaky. That's
Oh,
it's the adjective of the
okay.
of the noun.
All right. Well, I'll try what I can. There's the family has acquired some wealth, as you can see, and I gather the mother was actually painted first, and then the baby was painted later. It's very possible by a different limner. The poses, again, they go back not even so much the Baroque mezzotints as back to the Elizabethan, to the 16th century age, where the Italian art is just barely reaching, but the attitudes of the royal family of Elizabeth and her court is still quite stiff, quite medieval. And since these people, as I said, have distrust of the Baroque flamboyance, they go back to this Elizabethan stiffness, but of course they don't have the same skills as those portraits, but it is conveyed nevertheless. And she sits on her chair, not a throne. The throne goes to the paterfamilias, but the chair is beautiful, and the chair is actually upholstered with a turkey rug, which was the height of wealth and of exhibition of wealth. And at this point, they want to show it. Obviously, they do not have social hierarchy as Europe has social hierarchy. They do not have nobility, but so their hierarchy is now determined by wealth. and to show their wealth, they want artists. They need artists because the artists are the ones who can exhibit it to full and to have these portraits in the house or in the house of their relatives and to show how wealthy the family is. So this chair, as you see, is upholstered with a turkey rug, which came a very, very long distance and probably through England. Well, definitely through England. She is wearing a beautiful, beautiful lace. Probably came from Belgium lace. Everything is imported here because this taffeta, this beautiful silk taffeta, is not yet produced in America. So everything on this woman is imported at great expense. And everybody who was looking at this painting knew it. And then that's what was important. Not in the naturalism of a sitter's position. No, just the likeness of the face and the glory of her garments and surrounding atmosphere. In fact, she even that's the green taffeta dress. She very carefully pulled it up. Look on her right knee to show you that the petticoat is also done of beautiful red silk with gorgeous hand-stitched, well, obviously handmade. They didn't have machines for embroidery at that time. So it's not just her dress, but also, and the beautiful, beautiful ribbons. The child who was born a little later was added to the picture and is also shown in beautiful, beautiful attire. So a lovely, really lovely portrait. And this is called the Mason Limner, who painted the Mason children, David, Joanna, and Abigail. It's in the museum in San Francisco. Again, the boy, who is what? What do you think? He probably is 7 years old, this boy? Yes? He stands there like a young lord. He is dressed like a young lord. He is dressed in Europe. He has a baton in his hand here, the baton. He has gloves, of course, even though in this case there's no chance of mistaking him for a girl. Nevertheless, this is what gentlemen do. They wear gloves and they have their arm on their hip, as he does. He is looking. I mean, everybody. There's no connection between them. They're being painted. The one, the two, the three. It's all very pragmatic. It's not painted as in Baroque, of course. Everyone intermingles, and in a Baroque painting, there's a unity to a painting which brings together the whole composition. I mean, these people simply weren't trained in this regard. So he paints them one. Each one is an individual, and each one looks the other way. But there's a definite family resemblance that he got. They all look alike. In fact, there's a boy with his lovely sort of light brown hair falling on his shoulders. Beautiful, beautiful lace, sort of looking 17th century Dutch, and the slits in the garments to show again the undergarment. That the undergarment was also of the finest and most beautiful linen. Same with with his pantaloons. His feet look somewhat Egyptian, as you can see when one leg goes parallel to the other leg, and both feet are either left or right, and that's what happens. That's what happens here, because it's difficult to tell which one is a right foot and which one is the left foot. By the design itself, not by the position, obviously. With the girls, the legs are covered, but sort of they're done exactly the same. They wear identical dresses. They're two little sisters, and one has a flower in her hand, very genteel, very lovely, and the other has a fan and some beads, perhaps prayer beads. They both wear their headdress, and everything is done of the best of fabrics, and everything is indeed imported. And again, as always, there's this nod to Baroque composition with the curtain hanging above them. And then there came a man who knew something about painting, who was English, who may have had some training, who certainly saw a lot of wonderful painting. he was clearly a mariner, and must have participated in a number of battles. His name is Thomas Smith, and at the end of the 17th century, he appoints a self-portrait, and it's the only Puritan self-portrait that we know of. He is wearing, is he wearing a wig? I think it's a wig, or is he wearing his natural hair?
Who knows?
Because,
That lace looks nice, though.
oh, the lace is gorgeous, yes. Well, you know, he in fact attempts here the light and shadow. He attempts to ape the European compositions, but then of course he swings back to the Elizabethan description with this very, very meticulous, decorative, somewhat flat depiction of the lace, but very beautiful. He is holding a skull in his hands. He clearly feels the end is approaching, and this is his contribution. He is perhaps what he left to his family about himself, that he was perhaps a naval officer, and there's some battle here that he must have participated in, and there's a fort with a flag of a victor. Presumably he was among the victors. Sits in a beautiful chair. The beautiful velvet curtain above him has this silk tassel, and then he's written a poem that goes with the painting, as a true Protestant, not regretting leaving this world. And here's the poem: why should I the world be minding, therein a world of evils finding? Then farewell world, farewell thy jeers, and thy joys, thy toys, and thy wiles, thy wars, truth sounds retreat. I am not for the eternal draws to him my heart, by faith which can thy force subvert, to crown me after grace with glory. So there's the poem, and well, here is the one and only Puritan portrait, which, as I said, attempts to model the face as opposed to just flatten the face, and is presumably, well, clearly a likeness. So there'll be, I remember it will not be until later that the different communities will come together and form the original, the United States. Right now they're all just jointed. There are communities in the north, Plymouth, Massachusetts, Newport, and then there's another community of the Dutch around New York and the Hudson Valley. Then there are Swedes around Delaware, and then more English, but different sort of English, around Virginia, and we'll talk about that as well. So here we are in New York, and New York is doing quite well. Remember, the Holland in the 17th century was the most prosperous country in the world. Their ships went all the way to the Far East, to Asia. They brought with them spices, they brought with them cloths. The Dutch traded everywhere. The Dutch, it is the 17th century is the golden age of the Dutch.
And at this point, New York is New Amsterdam.
And New York is New Amsterdam.
Right.
So the Dutch are spilling that kind of wealth to New York as well. New York is doing quite well. They're very prosperous, and they're called patroon, sort of patrons, and he's called the patroon Limner in Dutch, and he is painting the whole family of Jacobus Stutenburger in the early 18th century, and he gives them a kind of grandeur because he makes their heads, especially here's the lady, because their head is so small, the whole the body appears monumental. The body appears so statue-like, so impervious at the same time, so full of, well, if not nobility, but certainly disdain, because this is clearly a very wealthy family, and she's actually, this is not, yeah, this is a rose, but it's not, this one is more red, you can tell. This is Young Lady with a Rose, attributed to Peter van der Linde, who was Dutch. But he catches, in this case, he doesn't just catch the likeness, he catches the attitude. and that is as you see, he dispenses with Baroque curtains. He dispenses with frills. He just concentrates on the people themselves. The man again is dressed in a wonderful, probably the finest of woolen coats with gorgeous lace underneath, and beautiful lace pocket here, lace, and the lady is in a silk dress, and the way he does the folds, it's almost 20th century folds. It's as if he doesn't really care to blend it together. It's also possible he doesn't know how, but the result came out very directional and very compositional in a way. And of course, the whole attitude, as I said, is very clear. The left hand is a bit awkward, but again serves its purpose of elegance and disdain. The girl is more charming, but she is dressed in this lovely olive green garment. Now the lady has no earrings, no attributes, no jewelry of any sort, which almost contributes to her significance as a woman in her own right, sort of the New Amsterdam Mona Lisa of sorts. So now she's certainly not smiling. This one is smiling. This one does have a little bit of a smile, and she's probably what, 18, 17 years old. He painted the hands very, very large for someone as slight as this girl. She does have a little piece of jewelry around her neck, and sort of painted in a Limner tradition, attributed to Peter van der Linde. But whenever we don't know who painted something, and if there's even such a thing as a hint that it could be painted by someone we know, we immediately attribute it to them. So we really don't know who painted it. All right, here these. So we know that there's Massachusetts and Connecticut. Massachusetts, Connecticut, they have their own colonies. And then here is the New Amsterdam, as you say, and goes up the Hudson all the way. And then there's Fort Christina, that is around the Delaware River, in the lower section of the Delaware River. And it was a Swedish colony along the lower reaches, established during the 30 Years' War. This was the wars of religion that lasted from 1618 to 1648, absolutely devastated Germany. And it was then that the Swedish came here. Settlements were established on both sides of the Delaware Valley, in the present-day states of Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and often in places where Swedish traders had been visiting since 1610. Again, so this colony, the New Sweden, was again an attempt by the Swedish to establish a colony here. And then to the south, we have the Virginia colonies. So you have the ones here in Massachusetts, Connecticut, another one around New York, then the Christina colonies, and then down the Virginia colonies. And they all have very distinct personalities. And while of course there's travel in between, and these Limners will go from north to south, south to north, in between, they were journeymen, they were itinerant craftsmen. So they will be traveling. Let's see what we have here. One painter, Gustavus Hesselius, was in fact fascinated for himself. He wasn't obviously commissioned to do it, and he painted this in Pennsylvania. William Penn and his son John Penn, I think, they were given a charter to come to contemporary Pennsylvania and colonize it. The great attraction, of course, of the new lands was land. There was no land left in England, whereas America, of course, had land galore. They were limited in the south by the Spaniards. They were limited in the west by the native populations. But and the French, actually, the French will colonize Canada, as you know, go down Mississippi, and will try to establish that whole area for themselves. So the English were stopped by the French for a while. But otherwise, all up until the Mississippi, land galore. In fact, they could have it for free as long as they colonized it. And one of the artists was in fact so fascinated. Again, like the first one that we saw in this lecture series, was fascinated by the dignity, by the life of these men, by their attitudes that were so unfamiliar to the Europeans, and the Europeans who were there, in fact, were mistreating them dreadfully. So he felt he needed to record them for himself and, of course, for posterity, and we are very, very grateful to him. And there were two Native American chiefs. One is Tish Kohan on the left, and the other one is Lapowinsa on the right. And their faces are just, they're full of self-respect, and they're full of their power, and they're full of dignity, and they know what they're worth, and they have respect from their community, and as such they show it in their great poise and their attitude. Unfortunately, the Penns were very interested in getting as much territory as they possibly could. So there was the so-called Walking Purchase Treaty that I think William Penn's son agreed on with these two chiefs, and it was meant, the colonists were meant to have as much land as they could walk around non-stop in 36 hours. And so they cheated, of course, and they hired a professional runner. And and as a result grabbed for themselves an enormous amount of land.
Oh.
I know. So yeah, there was something, I think maybe 10 years ago that the Native Americans were trying to go to court. I don't know what happened, but yes, this was the so-called Walking Purchase Treaty. It was really a running purchase treaty.
That's disgusting. Yeah.
Look, the colonists' behavior towards the native populations. We'll talk about it more in this series. Also, with the Penns came the Quakers, and the Quakers were still there, and they did not believe much in art anymore than the Puritans did in the northwest of them. But among them, well, and it's later on. I mean, we're talking about the end of the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century. Among them appeared this Edward Hicks, who became a very famous American folk painter, but he also was a religious minister of the Society of Friends of the Quakers, and he dabbled with a brush. He essentially painted the same thing over and over and over again. And that was the Peaceable Kingdom. They're worth a tremendous amount of money now, these paintings. And that was all right, so long as the Bible was maintained and the Bible was illustrated. The Quakers felt that was fine. And the Peaceable Kingdom, the idea comes from Isaiah 11:6. The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. He had absolutely no training, but he was sort of self-taught in the Limner tradition. Let's draw the contours and paint in flat paint what we know about these animals, as long as they are recognizable. They don't have to be realistic. They just have to be recognizable. We have to draw a likeness, and that he very much did. I mean, the lion, he probably never saw a lion in his life, so looks a bit like a cat and a dog, right? It's sort of a combination of the two of them. He obviously knew what a bull looked like. Anything that he didn't know is a bit awkward. So these are these animals answering to Isaiah, and then in the back you see the Quakers doing their walking treats. So here the animals are coming together in peace, and this from the point of view of the Quakers. Here are the people doing the same. But essentially what they're doing, the composition is taken actually from Benjamin West, and there's the Delaware River.
But the lion's about to eat the other animals is what's really about to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly what's about to happen. That the lion is about to eat them all. Yeah.
Uh-huh.